Hello, and welcome again to a Polar Bears International live chat here on Tundra Buggy 1. We are currently on the shores of Hudson Bay, just outside of Churchill, Manitoba in Canada. We do have a sleeping polar bear just outside Buggy 1 right now. We've been watching him for much of the day. He's taking a little rest, so we'll keep an eye on him throughout the broadcast, and we'll keep an eye out for more polar bears coming in as well. So today, first we'll introduce ourselves, and then we are specifically going to talk a little bit about one of Polar Bears International's research projects, our Bear-dar project. But we also have an extra guest today. We've got a lot of knowledge here about polar bears and Churchill and polar bear research, so any questions you have, please do send them in, and we will do our best to answer them. The best place to send in questions is just in the explore.org live chat comment section, and we have moderators that are passing us the questions, and thank you in advance for your questions. We look forward to hearing from you. But first we'll introduce ourselves in a bit of the space, like where are we, especially for anyone that's a bit new to the polar bear cams. My name's Elise McCall. I'm the Director of Conservation Outreach and one of the staff scientists at Polar Bears International. So I get to host many of these shows and run some of these programs and get to work with my fabulous colleagues here. I'll pass it over to BJ.
Hi, my name is BJ Kirchhofer, and I'm the Director of Conservation Technology for Polar Bears International. And really what that means, I get to spend a bit of time with polar bears and also a bit of time doing some research, trying to find maybe new technologies that could help benefit, understand polar bears, maybe protect polar bears, maybe protect some people. So, yeah.
Thanks, BJ. And we have a special guest today. We're happy to welcome Dr. Evan Richardson for the week. Evan, could you tell a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Dr. Evan Richardson, and I'm a polar bear research scientist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, which is a department within the federal government here in Canada. And I've been fortunate enough to be involved in polar bear research programs here in Western Hudson Bay, where we're broadcasting from for the last 20 years. So I've conducted a lot of research up here and work with Polar Bears International on communicating the results of our work and talking about polar bear conservation and what can be done to conserve the species.
Thanks, Evan. And I think maybe a great way to start, again, I hope there's some new viewers, maybe some people over from the brown bear cams. Could you talk a bit about this area? Why are polar bears here right now? Why are we watching a bear sleep in some willows? What's going on that we're able to see polar bears right now?
Sure, right. I mean, most people when they think about polar bears, they think about a bear kind of walking across the sea ice in, an Arctic marine environment. But throughout many parts of their range, polar bears are actually forced ashore every summer when the sea ice melts. And so here in Western Hudson Bay, the sea ice melted in late June. The bears swam ashore, and now they're on land resting, trying to conserve their body reserves until the sea ice forms again and later in the fall, in November, December, and they can go back out and start hunting seals again. So we're able to come out on tundra buggies out on the tundra here and interact with the polar bears and watch them safely from vehicles. And then also engage with folks like you that tune into the live broadcast to learn more about polar bears and what they're doing at this time of year in Hudson Bay.
Thanks, Evan. It really is a special part of the polar bears range here. We're so lucky to be able to be here every fall. We have cameras spread out throughout the tundra. So if you're watching the polar bear cams, you'll probably see Lodge North and Lodge South. So the lodge is the Frontiers North Adventures Tundra Buggy Lodge. There's two cams, one on each side, of course, looking north and south. And those are out here seasonally as soon as the season kicks off, October, November. We also have a couple cams out at Cape Churchill, which is quite a ways east of here. If you look at a map, it's kind of where the coast starts going from east-west to north-south, kind of at that point. So a couple cams out there that get to see some really neat stuff. This year we saw caribou, wolves, of course, polar bears. We have a Northern Lights cam that runs in the winter, and then our beluga cams in the summer, if anyone has seen those. But this cam here, the Buggy 1 cam, this is a unique one because it's mobile. And maybe, BJ, you could just talk a minute about the mobile polar bear cam on Buggy 1.
Yeah, this is pretty special. So, it's a lot of places probably where you're tuning in from. You probably have cell phones, maybe you have home internet, things like that. But of course, you look outside at the polar bear cam, there's no internet bush out there. Actually, cell phones don't really work that well out here. We only got cell phones in Churchill 2 or 3, 4 years ago. So we have to provide internet for all this stuff to stream across so it can get to your homes wherever you live. And we do that through blasting microwave signals out here to Buggy 1. And we've got this super neat antenna here on top of the buggy that knows where it is because of GPS. It knows what direction the buggy is facing because of a compass. And it takes all that information and it points itself back towards town where the antennas are and where our signal comes from. So it's a pretty neat thing. If you maybe tuned in during the summer, we also have a beluga cam from Churchill that we help support, or we provide the streams for, and it's the same technology that we use to make the beluga cam work. We just steal all the parts off the beluga boat and we pop it on top of the buggy here, and away we go.
That's nice when you can reuse stuff. And
Totally.
Yeah, it works. That's
Yeah.
so great.
Yeah.
And we love Buggy One. It truly is a home away from home. 4 of us slept on here last night. There's a little bathroom. There's a stove where we just warmed up our lunch and a little fridge. And it really is our little home out here as we roll around and find polar bears for you and other people that are interested in the species. So back to polar bears for a minute. This population of polar bears here near Churchill, we call this population the Western Hudson Bay polar bear subpopulation. It's one of 19 across the world. So different polar bears in different areas of the Arctic have different situations, of course, kind of different types of sea ice, different patterns of sea ice, different kind of human disturbances. All, it's kind of different where we look, but ultimately polar bears do need Arctic sea ice, which Evan mentioned earlier. Right now, of course, because these bears live in Hudson Bay, there's no sea ice in the summer, so the bears have been on shore. But because the bears come on shore like they do and like we're able to watch, this is also one of the most accessible polar bear populations in the world. So this is why Churchill is sometimes called the polar bear capital of the world. It's very famous for seeing polar bears here, and therefore it's very famous for researchers here. This is one of the best places in the world to study polar bears. We know where they're going to be and when. We've got over 40 years of data on these polar bears. These were the first bears where we were able to show a link between climate changes in the sea ice and the polar bear's body condition. We know this population has declined over the last few decades, which has been linked to sea ice as well. So just to drive home that this population of bears is so special, it's teaching us so much about polar bears. What we learn here, we can apply across the Arctic, and it makes it just the best spot to also test new technology for understanding polar bears in different ways, because we know where we can test them. We know where the bears will be. So today we are talking about our Beardar project. We are testing it in Churchill, hoping to apply it more broadly across the Arctic, but this is a great place to start. So BJ, I don't know where you want to start on the Beardar. This is BJ leads it, the program. Kick it off. Tell us a bit about the Beardar. What is it and what's going on with it? What are we trying to do with this project?
Yeah, so I guess we could start with, we have 3 different radar manufacturers that we're working with here in Churchill right now. And like we've kind of been talking about here, this is a great place to test these things because we know that there's going to be bears around. Other places in the Arctic, this is pretty tough, the Arctic's huge. There's bears out there, but where can you go that you're going to predictably see multiple bears, maybe in a day, but definitely in a month or whatever. And so this place, the Hudson Bay, is a perfect place to come do that. Also, it's pretty convenient because we're not trying to survive ourselves each day as we maintain this equipment. We've got Buggy 1 here, that's pretty nice. The town of Churchill is pretty close as well. So we've kind of got a bit of infrastructure that makes life pretty easy. So this is a really great place to test these types of things. We've got 3 different radar manufacturers we're working with. One of them is on top of the Tundra Buggy Lodge. And we have 2 different sets of equipment from Spotter Global, set up in Walpus National Park, like 30 kilometers to our east. And then some stuff on the outskirts of Churchill on a crank-up tower. And then we've got a really neat kind of smaller unit that we'll be putting on Buggy 1 itself as we meander. And this is made by Relens, and it's kind of like a small piece of hardware tied to an iPhone app or smartphone app where you can see the radar output, you can see what the cameras are doing all kind of in one space. So the one on the Tundra Buggy Lodge, that's the biggest unit we're testing. Well, before we get into that, maybe we just talk about kind of how they work and why.
Sure.
And really, so what these radars are doing is they're looking for movement. There's there's a lot of different types of radar out there. You might be, if you've driven by an airport, you see something spinning. There could be maybe a radar that's tracking airplanes, or maybe it's looking at weather. Most of the units that we're using, they don't actually have any moving parts. They have just this kind of flat panel plastic antenna. And as things move out there, they are able to reflect energy back to the antennas kind of in different ways. And that's what these antennas are sensitive to, is this reflected energy. And through that information, they're able to tell how far away something is, how fast it's moving, estimate how big it is. And then for the more sophisticated systems, it can direct cameras to follow that movement on the shoreline, or wherever they are.
Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it's fun.
Really, really fun, and a really important project, we think. So one of the reasons that we're working on this project, and that BJ is sinking so much time into it and trying all these different types, is that we do know that human polar bear coexistence will be a rising concern across the Arctic in the coming decades. So Churchill is famous for handling polar bears right now. They have a polar bear alert team through the province. They are equipped to deter polar bears from town, to move polar bears away. If they have to, they can trap a polar bear, keep it at a holding facility, and then release it. This is unique in the world. There are countries, communities all over the Arctic that experience polar bears but have nothing like that in place. So how can we support other communities in dealing with polar bears, keeping people and polar bears safe when they don't have the same sorts of resources? So there's a lot of different options that communities have and that we are trying to support. There's low-tech options. There's, for example, we worked on a polar bear coloring safety book for kids. Education is a big thing when it comes to, human-wildlife coexistence. Another thing that's quite simple on paper, but it's a little trickier in the Arctic, is using bear-proof garbage bins. They can be expensive to ship and install, but if we're able to support communities in having bear-proof garbage bins, that really cuts down the amount of attractants that a polar bear might get into. So what we're seeing across the Arctic is that sea ice is declining. In some areas, it's already declined quite a bit. Those polar bears are getting stuck on land longer without access to their seal prey. You can imagine a bear gets pretty hungry. Even a bear that would prefer to eat seal blubber still likes to eat, and they're sniffing out attractants in communities. If we can lock those smelly attractants down, a bear is less likely to come into town and much less likely to get rewarded for coming into town. And that's a really big thing with polar bears, is this reward. We helped Churchill, the town of Churchill, get some polar bear bins installed. The town was really great about spearheading this program, and it has been quite successful so far. In fact, there's only been one known case of a polar bear at one of these bins, and that's because that bin was filled with fish guts and wasn't closed properly. Otherwise, those bears don't have that attractant like they used to. And maybe, Evan, if I could throw to you for a minute and talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of maybe attractants in Churchill, and also like bear behavior around these sort of, we don't like to say problem bears, but that's what they were known as before, that sort of bear behavior that comes into town.
Absolutely, and yeah, like Elisa mentioned, we're in the polar bear capital of the world, and so polar bears congregate along the coast here in western Hudson Bay, and in particular around Churchill, because this is one of the first places that sea ice forms in this part of the Hudson Bay system. So the bears are sitting and waiting for the ice to come, but they're also every day dwindling down their body reserves. And for some of the bears that don't have as much body fat, they get pretty hungry while they're waiting for the ice to come back. And so if there are smells and attractants in the community, that has the potential to draw bears into the community and create increased potential for human-bear conflict. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, Churchill actually had an open dump. So the dump here was like many dumps in the south where, the garbage truck came, there's just a big hole in the ground, they dumped the garbage in, and the bears got into the garbage quite a bit. And, a number of bears kind of had a habit of doing it, almost every single year. And some of those bears would also go into town looking for food rewards from people's trash bins, or, walking around and smelling, nice smells that are coming out of the restaurants and the bakeries. And obviously that creates, dangers for both people and the bears. And so the Polar Bear Alert Program came into existence to, handle those human polar bear interactions, so bears didn't get shot or injured, and people didn't get injured. And so that program has been a huge success in terms of conserving and mitigating those negative interactions between humans and bears over the long term. But what we're seeing now is they've actually closed the dump several years ago. They've developed a new waste management system that basically the bears can't get into garbage anymore. And so, that's really reduced the amount of conflict within the community. But they still have bears coming through town. There's still those smells that, the bears find interesting. And so, when we think about polar bear conservation, mitigating negative interactions between, humans and polar bears is, one thing that, we can do to help conserve polar bear populations. And that's where this, Bear-dar project is super interesting, because here we have conservation officers, and they have a 24-hour hotline, and they're working around the clock to keep the town safe. But, they're people, they need to sleep too. But this technology is super great because it's working 24/7, right? It's all electronics, and BJ gets everything set up, and they're learning to build these algorithms to detect bears with the radar. And if you can set these things up in places where polar bears potentially frequent, they can set it up so there's systems to provide notification to the conservation officers that there are bears in town, and so these things work for you 24/7, which is amazing, because unfortunately a lot of things with conservation or anything else, it's always time, money, and people. And if you invest the resources into this technology, then you can get a lot of long-term benefit from it.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Do you want to expand on that, like kind of more into the radar side of things? Yeah, like Evan said, people need to sleep, and in many of these communities that don't have patrols, when there's a storm blowing and visibility is really low, or when people just need to sleep, particularly as the nights get darker in the fall and the bears should be on the ice and they're not yet, it gets pretty tricky, and this radar can really fill in the holes. BJ, could you talk a little bit about, just kind of the plan you have? You've done some very cool stuff, so just feel free to riff on what you want to talk about.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So the radars are so cool because
Yeah.
they can see just about everything that's moving out there, even the small bushes and things that are kind of blowing in the wind right now. They show up on radar, and so we have to filter all this stuff out. But we don't want to filter too much, right? It's this kind of signal to noise ratio thing that we got to sort of figure out. We want to make sure that we can hone in on the polar bears, but then ignore everything else. And I think if we can nail that down, then these tools start to be super powerful, because rules can be built off of that. So if the radar sees a bush, well, ignore it. But if it sees a polar bear, then what might be relevant to that community in the north that would be helpful for them? Is it a blinking red light that says, hey, there's a bear in town? Is it a text message to a person that then responds? Things like that, I think, and these since these are computer systems, they're super flexible, and they could really be customized to the folks in that community to provide them with feedback, letting them know that there's something out there, and that they should either respond or be extra safe or whatever it might be. So, so the systems are pretty sophisticated, customizable, and we just need a little bit of tuning in order to sort of hone in on that.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And again, if you have any questions about the technology or polar bear ecology or Churchill in general, please do type them in the chat, and we will get to them during our talk today. So this is one really great example of like a high-tech solution, but it's scalable. So you could have something smaller for a camp, for example. So if there's a group of people just setting up camp on the land, we have like a small unit, maybe looking a kilometer or two around, and then you could have a bigger unit for a community, maybe up to 11 kilometers is maybe the limit so far or something.
So the big one that's on the Thunder Buggy Lodge right now, it sees theoretically out to 11 kilometers if it's turned.
Huge.
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, that's especially with a flat terrain like this. It's 11 kilometers. I think is further than we can see on the horizon here. And of course today's a clear day, and I think that's the other really interesting thing about radar. Of course, polar bears live in a place that's under constant change. It could be change in weather, change in visibility because of blowing snow, fog, all kinds of things. But it's also a place where daylight changes pretty drastically. Here we go from a time of year where it could have 20 hours of daylight to only 5 hours of daylight. That's a lot of darkness in the winter. And so radar can see through the darkness and the snow and all that kind of stuff, and let you know that something's moving around out there. So I think it's a pretty neat tool potentially here for a place like this.
Very interesting. One thread I want to circle back to before I lose it, because I find it so interesting, is after talking to you, Evan, another really important reason to kind of get on top of, especially waste management as soon as possible. It might take a while to really deal with polar bears coming into town because moms teach their cubs. Is that right? Like, this behavior can be passed down in different ways potentially. So if a mom gets used to eating garbage somewhere and she teaches her cubs that, it might take a while for this behavior to change. So could you talk a little bit just about like how that behavior gets moved around?
Absolutely. Food rewards are a strong stimulus for any animal. Lots of people, train their pets with food rewards, and you can get them to do all sorts of crazy tricks. Obviously, polar bears are just trying to get by and make a living. But when they get those food rewards, it's a pretty strong stimulus for them to repeat a behavior. And so what we see is when females bring their cubs into communities and get those food rewards, those cubs are more likely to come back and be problem bears themselves. And so you kind of have to, break this chain of learning and, come up with these systems that we've been talking about, whether it's, bear-safe food containers or, being able to detect bears and, aversively condition them to not come into town, either through loud noises or blinking lights or, anything like that kind of makes the bears question that, they really want to interact with people, or that it's, worth kind of coming in and investigating these interesting smells and things. And so, the more we can do on that, the better off we'll be in terms of helping mitigate human polar bear conflict. And like Elisa mentioned, this is something we're looking at for the future, because bears are spending more time on land throughout their circumpolar range, in places like western Hudson Bay, southern Beaufort Sea. Polar bears are losing body condition, and in particular, those bears that are very lean typically end up being conflict bears. And so, different governments and agencies have collected data on, human polar bear conflicts, and it's often these skinnier bears that are kind of, really looking for, a few extra calories to kind of get by till the ice forms, that end up coming into communities. And, even if you talk to the Inuit in the north, they'll tell you like the really skinny bears and like the young bears that are kind of just getting by, those are the most dangerous bears to deal with. The big bears that are fat and happy and, have been getting lots to eat, they typically don't like to cause trouble. But, if you talk to people, throughout the Arctic, the bears that come into camps and, are a little bit more aggressive and, looking for that extra meal to try and kind of get themselves by, they're the ones that are dangerous. And so anything we can do to kind of, separate people from those bears and, maybe make sure that those conflicts don't happen is great for polar bear conservation.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point. Ultimately, this is about polar bear conservation. And if we want to keep wild polar bears in the wild while we work on the biggest issue, which is climate change and the loss of sea ice habitat, keeping those bears in the wild means keeping them safe, which means first keeping the people safe. If people feel empowered and safe from the bears, and like there's tools and solutions to deal with the problem and to prevent the problem in the first place, we're likely to keep humans safer and then keep those polar bears safe as well. So this will be a process. It will be something that we're working on a suite of options in Churchill. Churchill's currently working to become the first world recognized polar bear safe community, and the idea is that eventually getting that kind of label will help us kind of catapult Churchill and its lessons across the Arctic, and other communities around the Arctic can base what they can do off of a model that's worked in Churchill, and be able to choose the different options that work for them. Not every bear safe option works for every community. There's all sorts of different situations out there, so we need to be able to support them having a lot of different things to choose from, basically. And again, that could be something high tech like a radar, low tech like a garbage bin, educational, like a coloring book, or even things like encouraging people to have access to bear spray when possible. We carry bear spray when we're out on the land. We can also help train folks in communities on how to deter polar bears, great things like that. I want to pivot to another high-tech option potentially that could be used in certain situations, which are these tags, these GPS tags. So historically, we've tracked polar bears for decades, mostly females with GPS collars. But males couldn't be collared because they have kind of these pylon heads where their necks are bigger than their heads and they could slip the collar off. But often it's males kind of getting into more trouble. Females do too. But the big idea is just being able to track more bears gives us more data. So tracking data in and of itself is important, and we can talk about that. But also important when it comes to potentially intercepting a bear that's returning to town. So BJ has been spearheading our work on a tag that can be used on any polar bear, and maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, we call it our Burr on Fur project, and it's really the tags we're trying to mimic nature. If you've ever been maybe on a hike in the woods and got one of these seed pods that's been a tag along, maybe on yourself or your dog, they stick on for a short period of time and eventually release and go do their job. Well, the same sort of thing is our idea with this Burr on Fur project, where it would be a temporary tag using the fur as the kind of attachment place on the polar bear, and when the tag's left, or when it's done with its useful life, then it releases. It simply falls off. Maybe when the bear molts, maybe when the copper pieces corrode enough where they can just drop off. So like I say, it's our Burr on Fur. The transmitters themselves are very light. They're 29 grams, I think, and there's a nice picture, maybe of one in the palm of a hand. They can last 270 days. Now, Polar Bears International didn't design the electronics in there. This is a proven technology. We wanted to take something that's already in use and then kind of provide this intermediary attachment mechanism that goes between the fur and the transmitter. So we're taking this transmitter that can be bought by any wildlife researcher and something that's been used here in the Arctic on polar bears, and we're attaching it to our plastic substrate and then kind of spinning it, in this example, spinning it into the fur, or in our other example, pulling fur up through copper ferrules and crimping it. So this could be a great solution for problem bears near communities. You could stick a transmitter on them. It's definitely not permanent. It hangs out for a while, and then once the sea ice returns and the bear can head out, the transmitter falls off, and everybody's happy.
Yeah, and give people a little bit more warning about which bear's coming back. And this kind of leads to a question that came in, and Evan, I'm going to throw it to you. Particularly folks, again, that are coming over from the brown bear camps, where the brown bears are pretty recognizable, very recognizable with all the different kind of characters. The polar bears are a little different. So do we give them names? Do we know who they are when we're out here? How do researchers and anyone keep track of what polar bear is which?
Yeah, so I mean, some polar bears are identifiable from things like facial scars. So when the males are fighting during the breeding season, quite often they mark each other up, quite often on the muzzle. And so you'll see bears out here that have unique scars on them and are identifiable. And sometimes people come up with names for them. From a research perspective, we know bears based on tattoos that we put on the inside of their upper lip, so similar to a tattoo you might have on your pet, and that allows us to identify individuals over time, to look at individual survival, individual reproductive success, and just track how many individuals are in the population in total. But we're also kind of moving more towards genetic IDs for bears now. So we're genotyping all the bears and getting their DNA profiles to track individuals, but it also allows us to look at things like pedigrees, so we can see which males are reproducing in the population, which females are having the most cubs, how many cubs they're having, and it's all tracked through genetics, and so we can make all those maternal and paternal links. And so we don't give them kind of names, but quite often on the buggies here, you'll get bears that are recognizable, and they'll come up with some what you might call pet names for the bears out in buggy land here where we're at right now. But yeah, it's unless they have kind of really distinct markings, polar bears are fairly kind of homogeneous. They often look very similar, but they do differ based on how fat they are, or how big they are, or whether they have some of these unique markings.
Yeah. And this guy that we've been watching out here, yesterday he was the bear. If any of you saw that kind of polar bear starfish shuffle of him trying to get across the frozen pond, and then the one sleeping on the cam, same bear, he is recognizable because he does have one of those scars that Evan mentioned. He's got a scar above his eye. It's very distinct. He's a big boy, and we know who he is. I don't know if anyone's kind of coined a name for him. I'm sure the explorer community will let me know if you have a name for him. But we do know that, we've seen you around, and he's taking a nice little nap here. So we'll keep an eye on him. And again, if you do have any questions, let me know. We have a question. How are the transmitters attached to the bears? So maybe we could talk about the different types of transmitters and their different types of attachments. Evan, would you talk about collars first maybe, and we'll go from there?
Sure, yeah. And so, some of the initial information that we got on polar bear movement data actually came from collars that we could put on adult female bears. So, as Lisa mentioned, male bears, their heads are kind of shaped like traffic pylons, and so the collars just slide off. But female bears, the width of their skull is wider than the width of their neck, and so you can put collars on, and the back of their skull keeps them from sliding off. And so we've fit these collars. We give lots of wiggle room for the bears to grow, and so the collars can move around. They're not restrictive at all. But in putting those collars on, we can see where polar bears move. We can see what sort of habitat they're using. We can put other sensors on those collars like accelerometers, so we can kind of tell what the bears are doing, whether they're resting, running. We can tell when they're feeding, because quite often when they're feeding on a seal, if they pull they're pulling these big chunks of blubber off, and that's very unique in terms of the data that the accelerometers get. And so we can tell when they're feeding, a whole bunch of really interesting data that really helps us understand how polar bears are living out on the sea ice and what they're doing, how much energy they're using, and those sorts of things. And so the collars are very big. They're fairly robust. They do have drop-off mechanisms on them, so it's a pre-programmed thing to have the collar drop off after 2 years, which is kind of the expected, sort of reliable battery life for the collars. And then the collars just fall off, and the bears just kind of keep walking, and then we can use VHF locators to go out and pick up these collars and then download the data. I mean, the data gets transmitted to satellites while the bears were in the collars, but if you can actually get your hands back on the collar, you can get some extra data out of them. And so those are kind of the first generation, really kind of big, collars that were put out on adult females. But what BJ's been working on, which is fantastic, is you can put them on any bear you want, these burr on fur tags. So I'll let BJ talk about those.
Yeah, so these tags, like I say, it's a transmitter that's made by the same companies that make the big collars, but they've kind of shrunk things down. They're much more simple, so all of the different sensors that Evan talked about, these don't really have that. In fact, these are just even what they call Argos transmitters, so it's not even GPS locations you get. They're a little more general on the landscape. You have a pretty good idea where the bear is. You may not be able to spot it exactly on the planet, so it's within, I think, a couple kilometers or something like that. So it gives you a pretty good idea where the animals are. All of the simplification of that thing means that it's very, very light. It's like 29 grams or something like that. So it's a tiny little transmitter with a battery that lasts about 200 some days. And we put them on by either putting them on a piece of fabric and then pulling hair up through holes in the fabric and crimping copper ferrules around the fur itself. And then that sort of holds it loosely against the body. It's a fabric that's still flexible in the cold, and we don't pull too much fur. The copper ferrule is about 1/4 inch in diameter, so it's just a little bit of fur we just pull up through, and then crimp. For that one, it's pretty reversible too. So if you made a mistake and want to move the transmitter, or if maybe someone were to dart that animal and want to remove that transmitter, you could simply kind of reverse crimp those copper things and then just slide the whole thing off, and the things were removable. So that's kind of neat. The other one we have, we call this our tri-brush unit, and this thing is in kind of a shape of a triangle, and you can almost think of these, if anybody's seen hair curlers, people that maybe women that curled their hair. This is kind of based on that sort of technique where you might take a brush and spin it in. Well, these are more longer term than curlers, and so we put this down on the body of the bear, just on the nape of the neck back here, and then you turn the ends of the brushes and it picks up fur and it sucks it in and it kind of spins it around the drum. We can add a little bit of adhesive on top of that if we like, to kind of glue it in place, or we could just leave it as is, and that's how they stick. It's basically either grabbing fur or kind of entangling fur to hold these things on the bear. And I should say that this stuff has been developed mainly by, oddly enough, my father. It's been a great pleasure to work with him. He most recently retired from his day job, 39 and a half years at 3M, and we worked with him as he was at 3M and now as in retirement, kind of refining these designs. So it's been super fun working with him on kind of playing around with these designs and seeing if we can make them work.
That's so nice. Nice family project that
Totally
benefits the polar bears.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
We have another question. I'll throw this to you, Evan. Are the bears tranquilized so scientists can attach the tags or collars or tattoos? How is that done?
So great questions, and in order to put your hands on a polar bear safely, they do need to be tranquilized and sedated. Obviously, they're very large, very powerful, and potentially dangerous carnivores. So most of the research programs that we're involved in use helicopters to safely immobilize polar bears. So we fly along the coast of Hudson Bay here, and we'll find a bear and kind of look at the landscape around to make sure it's safe. There's no water for the bears to go into. There's no obstructing features that might injure the bear if it was running. And then we'll go in and dart the bear. They get a dose of the tranquilizer based on our estimate of their body mass from looking at them from the air. And then it takes about 3 minutes to 5 minutes for the bear to go to sleep. And we're just usually flying circles around. The bear's usually just kind of looking at us, and so it'll just kind of sit down and kind of lay down on the ground, and then it's safe to go down and interact with the bears. The drug we use is very, very safe. It's almost impossible to overdose a bear. So it has a really wide tolerance, and so if you're off just a little bit on the mass estimate on a bear, it's totally safe for them. It's reliable. They don't have any sort of what we call spontaneous arousals. So some of the drugs they initially used back in the 70s, scientists would be working on bears and they would just stand up and walk away to everybody's amazement. And so we said goodbye to those tranquilizing drugs a long time ago, and we use a really safe drug now that's very safe for the bears, very safe for the scientists that use it. And the bears are down for about an hour to an hour and a half, and then they start waking up and lifting their heads and moving a little bit, and we sit there and kind of make sure they're having a good arousal from the drug, and we monitor all sorts of vital rates like blood oxygen levels and breathing rates and all sorts of things, temperature to make sure they're not getting too warm, and once everything's a-okay, then we can leave the bear and they'll kind of be a little bit groggy for the rest of the day, just like you would be if you were on general anesthesia in a hospital. But we go back and check up on them, and they're always up moving around the next day and kind of doing polar bear things. So, that's one of the basically the only way that we can get up and actually twist these things into polar bear fur without endangering anybody. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. Evan has decades of research experience, and so maybe because we still have about 20 minutes left in the chat, not a ton of questions coming in. If you do have questions, again, please feel free to shoot them over here and we'll get to them. So maybe I can just pivot a little bit, Evan, to your research kind of background. You've done more than a couple very cool research projects. Maybe we could start talking a bit about your work in Wapask with Denning, and then maybe we'll go a little higher Arctic for what you're doing these days.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So, I've been super fortunate to be involved in research programs here in Western Hudson Bay since 2001 was my first year. I came up here working on bears. I had done some previous work in Churchill, but that was my first year working on polar bears up here. And I was doing a master's project as a master's student at the time, looking at polar bear maternity denning habitat here in Wapusk National Park, which is one of the largest polar bear maternity denning areas in the entire circumpolar Arctic. And so what's really interesting about Wapusk is polar bears go inland to make their dens in the summer after they come off the sea ice, but there's no snow at that point in the year up here, and and by the time females are ready to go into dens, there typically isn't a lot of snow accumulation. Later in October and November, so bears actually dig dens into these peat banks. So they're actually digging into the earth, into the peat, underneath spruce trees on the edges of lakes and creeks, and they'll kind of curl up inside these peat dens, and they'll stay in there. They'll get covered over with snow in the winter. They'll give birth to their cubs, and then they'll tunnel out in the springtime. But my project was focused on kind of mapping where all this important denning habitat is in the national park, but also looking at the effects of forest fires. So you wouldn't associate polar bears with forest fires, but in this part of the world, bears are denning underneath these spruce trees in banks of rivers and creeks and lakes, and so those are the areas that typically burn when we have fires up on the tundra. And one of the things about peat fires is they tend to kind of persist. They kind of smolder and then spark up again. And with climate change, we're seeing actually more lightning in the subarctic and Arctic in Canada, and so those are potential ignition sources for some of these fires. So we looked at the impacts of fires, and it definitely degraded the habitat, collapsed some of the dens, and it ends up melting out the permafrost too, which makes the banks less stable. And so even though there hasn't been a lot of fires since that research was conducted, it was still something we're interested in, just to kind of check and see and make sure it wasn't a huge threat to the maternity denning habitat here in Hudson Bay. And so I'm now doing a lot of research in the Canadian High Arctic on the north end of Baffin Island, and up there we're working with Inuit and traveling around on the sea ice, just looking at polar bear foraging ecologies. So we've learned a lot about polar bear diets and movements from our research programs here in Hudson Bay, and some of the data we get from GPS collars, where they move and where they're hunting. But this is kind of more interesting, kind of boots on the ice type of research. We're actually tracking the bears. We're looking at like how many seal holes they go to, how many different seal layers they have to break into before they actually catch a seal pup, and just trying to figure out how much energy they expend looking for their meals, and then how much energy they get when they finally do catch a seal, and just kind of putting all of those pieces together just to kind of try and understand the energetics of polar bears a little bit more, because that's a big question mark with climate change, is understanding kind of the flow of energy for polar bears. Right now they're living off their stored body reserves while they're laying around on land here in western Hudson Bay, but also understanding how things are changing in the Arctic marine environment in terms of the sea ice and the accessibility of seals. Competition for food resources is an important kind of component of that, kind of understanding that whole annual cycle of how polar bears make an existence in Arctic marine ecosystems.
Super interesting stuff, Evan. You've done a whole wide range of research over the years. Question for you, have you ever weighed a polar bear, and do people do that? How do you weigh a polar bear?
Yeah, we do weigh polar bears for our research programs. We also estimate weights, so we've taken a whole bunch of weight measurements and body measurements over the years, and we can use a formula to calculate the weight of a bear just based on its circumference around its chest, and also its body length from the tip of its nose to the end of its tail. But when we do actually weigh polar bears to get the actual estimates of mass, we typically use these really large tripods that are very robust, and then a cargo net, and typically has a board in it, so the bear can kind of lay comfortably and flat. It doesn't get like all folded up when you lift them off the ground, because we don't want to kind of press on their tummies or their lungs too much when they're immobilized. And we use a chain hoist to lift the bears, because some of the really large adult males can be up to 2,000 pounds, which is a lot of weight to move off the ground. And so it takes a whole team to roll a bear like that into a net and hook it up and lift it with the tripod. But it's amazing to be able to work on these animals. And sometimes you see the weight on the scale and you almost can't believe it. I mean, they are just absolutely huge.
Yeah. Polar bear research is hard work, whether it's lifting bears or being in the cold or doing all sorts of crazy things that you've both done. I've done a little bit myself, but really that's some hard work. Okay, back to you for this question, Evan. As climate change thaws the permafrost, will that affect the maternity denning habitats?
So I mean, we haven't done a ton of research on it in terms of like changes in permafrost in maternity denning habitat, but for sure, as the permafrost melts, we do see slumping on these banks and areas where females typically make their dens, and so flying around the study area, we can go to a place like Fletcher Lake, which is very famous for polar bear maternity dens. A lot of the kind of cute photos you see in magazines and calendars of females rolling and playing with their cubs in the trees were probably taken in that part of Wapusk National Park. And so in places like Fletcher Lake, we have seen changes in the habitat and slumping of some of those banks. But bears are still denning around there. So the good thing is there is a lot of maternity denning habitat relative to how many polar bears we have in Hudson Bay. So we don't really think it's a conservation concern at all that habitat may be changing and being modified as a result of permafrost melt or forest fires. There's still lots of places for these females to make dens, and so it's not something we're concerned about at this point in time.
Oh, good to know. And thank you for your questions. We still do have a few more minutes if anyone has any more coming in. And until then, I'll just talk a little bit about what we are up to for the next week or so, or 2 weeks, hope maybe a little more. We'll just see. We never quite know when the season's going to end out here. We always, for the bears, want them to head out to the ice sooner, but as long as they're around, we will be kind of here too and available to talk about them. Freeze up sometimes happens in mid-November. Sometimes it's been as late as mid-December. So we'll see how it goes. But for at least the next couple weeks, we have a lot of things planned. We know the bears will be here. And next week in particular is Polar Bear Week. So we are kicking off. It's always one of our favorite weeks of the year. We know we're going to have great bear action. We've got a lot of cool stuff going on. You'll see us highlighting our Detect and Protect project, which is part of what the Radar project is about as well. So keeping communities safe through a suite of different options. We'll be kind of fundraising for that, highlighting it, having fun, explaining that project. We do have a live chat. I believe it's next Wednesday. It's about the future for polar bears, and I'll be interviewing our new chief climate scientist, Flavio Lehner, about kind of what does sea ice look for polar bears, and also sharing good news stories about things going on around the world to reduce our use of fossil fuels and move us toward more renewable energy sources. So we're going to share some happy stuff with you, a lot of good things going on. We also will have a staff member going to Egypt in a couple weeks for the COP27 conference, and we'll connect with her in a couple weeks. So that's also part of that exciting stuff. And then, a couple more webcasts as well. So these are our live chats we do with you. We also do our Tundra Connections webcasts. Anyone is free to join those as well. Those are a little more aimed at students and teachers, but anyone can watch. Our webcasts next week there's one about polar bear research, kind of the impacts and the insights we've learned from these decades of polar bear research, impacts on the polar bears. How do we know how research impacts polar bears? Does it? And then we have another program about mamas and how it's hard to be a polar bear mom in the Arctic with this changing sea ice and finding seals and raising cubs. So how do moms make decisions that are best for their families? So it should be a really great week. We'll do a ton of social media. We'll be on Explore all the time chatting with you guys. If there's cool bear activity, which pretty sure there will be, we can also always hop on a mic and narrate what's going on. We'll be out here at the lodge and around the tundra. Apparently there's an Arctic fox out here right now. I haven't seen it yet. Have you seen it yet?
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
Looking forward to it though.
Yeah, we love this Arctic fox. Usually there's one a year at least that runs circles around the lodge at night, and we like to time it or see how fast it goes. I know that people saw them last night. I didn't, but we're keeping an eye out. They're pretty cute. Pretty darn cute. Other than that, yeah, I think we'll wrap up. No more questions for now. Thank you so much. 15 minutes was a good amount to fill anyway. So thank you. Also, special shout out to KT Miller, behind the scenes mixing the program. Thank you, KT. And also shout out to Cloud, our moderator, Cloud, on the Polar Bear Cam. So could not do this without you, without explore.org, without Frontiers North Adventures, all our partners that help make the Polar Bear Cams happen every fall. And thanks most of all to the viewers for tuning in today and for watching this from wherever you are in the world and for being interested in polar bears. And we hope we can continue to share our love for the species with you guys. Do you have any last comments, anything you guys want to say? Thank you for joining me today, the panelists. Yeah.
It's great to be here, and definitely tune in next week for Polar Bear Week.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Yeah, special thanks to Evan, too. We brought Evan up this week. I don't think I fully told you what you were getting yourself into, but he's been such a great sport being on camera and doing all sorts of outreach for us. So it's really great to have Evan and his expertise up. And you'll see a lot more of BJ in the future anyway, so we'll get you back on next week. Thanks for talking about Bear-dar today.
Anytime, Elisa.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye-bye.